Welcome to another Zero Carbon 2030 podcast with me, Fraser Durham from Argan Solutions. And this week I had been working on a wind and solar podcast all about how to sort of optimally connect wind and solar to the grid. But obviously with everything going on with the Covid-19 outbreak, and also not just that, but me and my family have had to self-isolate because we all came down with something or symptomatic stuff last Friday. So hence, I've been at home, been thinking about this whole thing, and thought rather than focusing on the wind and solar elements, would sort of give you some thoughts on how maybe the response to Covid-19 could be applied to climate change. So I think one of the really interesting responses from my perspective is actually how quickly us as a family and everybody else, not just in the UK but also across the world, has actually responded to the scientific advice and political advice on how to respond. So I think what's really interesting is actually, if you look at what's going on in the UK at the moment, every day now we have the Prime Minister standing up, not flanked by other political allies, but actually by scientific advisors. So you have the Chief Scientific Advisor on one side and the Chief Medical Officer on the other. And Boris Johnson actually doesn't make any commentary on the scientific or medical elements, purely on the political elements, and actually defers all of those questions to the two advisors. And I think what's really interesting is that actually, so as a response, we have all listened to the scientific advice, and very rapidly we've said, right, okay, I've got a cough or had a bit of a fever, whatever. It might not even be COVID-19, it might be something else, but I will self-isolate, I will not travel, I will basically take the advice. And very rapidly we've seen this kind of change in society. Now, if I think about what's driving those things, and these are just my thoughts, probably right or wrong, there is number one, there's a selfish element. So we're all sort of sitting there going, right, well, this could be bad for me and my family, or those that are close to me, parents, etc. So I'm going to take action. So there's a selfish decision really at the start about why to act. I think coming from sort of that kind of protective element. But then secondly, there's a really interesting element, which is the selfless element, or sort of the community element, which is actually what you're finding is that people are self-isolating, social distancing, etc., really to protect those in their community and those around them that maybe they don't actually know, but because there is this overwhelming sense that this is for the benefit of society, local, regional, national, however you want to put it. And that's really, really interesting, and that's sort of happened rapidly over a very short period of time. And so I've been sort of thinking, what is it that we can learn from this whole thing in relation to climate change? Now I know that if you go back to what Greta Thunberg's been saying, and we've heard literally since I've been involved in climate change, which is listen to the scientists. What are the scientists saying? Blah blah blah. And a lot of us sort of ignore it, and it just doesn't register with us. And I suppose my key thought really is because it is not done in the same way as, say, COVID-19. If we really believe that climate change was a crisis, and a crisis not just local but national but also global consequences, we would see the same response from our leaders. We would see Boris Johnson standing in front of the cameras every day or every week, whatever it might be, and updating us as a society on the latest views politically, and then supported by chief climate scientists or environmental scientists, etc., like we're having at the moment, who are then proposing what the latest science is actually saying and how that should impact the way that we act. And I sort of feel that it's almost, this is the approach that we sort of need to get to. We need better communication, more regular communication, more in-your-face communication and a unity of politics and science in front of the cameras to say to people what is going on, why they need to act, and why they need to do it. So just imagine, every week the Prime Minister stands up in front of the country, on the cameras, in front of the journalists, and says, right, okay, guys, this is what this is the game plan for climate change, this is what we need everybody to do, and we're going to have the Chief Climate Officer or Chief Climate Scientist who's going to sort of tell us the latest science and how that's feeding into this, and we're going to start ratcheting up the actions as we need to, as they're doing with Covid-19. Oh my gosh, that would be a really interesting experiment to sort of see how we as a society would sort of start to act. I think what's also really interesting is if you look at what's going on with the Covid-19 elements in the UK, especially anyway, that a lot of the actions are voluntary. So it's not that we are being told that we have to self-isolate, otherwise we'll go to jail, or, there's a curfew, or, we'll get fined or whatever. Basically, there's very much a kind of trusting relationship between the government and the population at the moment, which is saying, the science is saying this, and we advise that you do this. And actually, as a result, people are doing it. And they're doing it without the kind of rebellion or the kind of sort of rioting that maybe we've sort of seen in other places where it's enforced. And I think that's a really, for me, that's a really positive sort of result of this, which is actually, again, if we take that sort of climate change response, there are certain regulations that need to be put in place. But if we can get to a point where we are advising and we are asking people to join us in this journey, and to do it from a sort of an engaging, voluntary perspective for the benefit of themselves and also society, then actually, again, you may get this really great, rapid, sort of positive response as well. So, a bit of a rambling podcast this week, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I feel that actually there's a lot of positives that people much more sort of educated in sort of psychology and psychological change and sort of the psychologies of change will be taking from this whole process to apply to sort of the areas of the environment and climate change and as such. But I must say that I'm finding this whole process, however terrifying it can be for a lot of people, also as a positive process to really sort of understand maybe the right way, what works, what doesn't work, and maybe the right way to go about things from a climate perspective. One thing certainly for sure is, as a result of this anyway at the moment, we're doing everything almost that we need to be doing from a pro-climate perspective. And I think there's going to be a lot of learnings and a lot of understandings and education as a result of that. I'll stop there. I've got to go back. I've got to try and educate my kids at home now. That's a challenge. And thanks for listening. And please have a listen to our other podcasts. I'm looking to come out with a couple of other views on more specific sort of areas of the carbon or climate crisis over the coming weeks and months. So please keep listening. My name's Fraser Durham. You can contact us at argansolutions.com. And thanks for listening. Speak to you soon. Okay, bye.
Podcasting for brands. I am thehound.com.